Welcome to our February edition here of our Education Technology Leaders Webcast. I'm David Couch. Thanks for joining us. I have Marty Park and Mike Lettingham with me, but off camera I have Chuck Austin and Bob Hackworth ready to come up here with different topics that they will have. Encourage you to take a look at Go Soapbox. This is our way to get feedback from you all on a variety of topics, and we have more Go Soapbox questions, poll questions, and discussion questions than we normally have. This may be the most we've had this year.
Most in history.
Most in history.
Yeah.
Most in history. History making today. That's good to hear. So we're definitely interested in your feedback on those topics, and obviously when you respond to those, we'll be going through different parts of the webcast and pointing those up, because this is really intended to be a two-way type of webcast. And so the other parts is you'll have other conversations on Go Soapbox. We have people monitoring those. To the ones that bubble up, we'll address those, and then all the other ones, we typically have our staff members that circle back with you in some kind of way. So let me start out with, and Marty, I don't know if there's any kind of background. I know, do we have the Go Soapbox questions open now from the respond to?
They're not.
They're not open. So I want you to give a little background of one of them.
Yep.
Before we open it up for the responses to the CIO webcast.
Yep. So the CIO Summit topic that we'll open up as we start to get into there, it's an external link to a form. Really, through Go Soapbox, there was really no way to capture in a good way your top 2 to 3 topics that you would like to hit on at the summit. And so we're going to have you copy and paste that URL into another browser tab. So we'll get to that.
Right, and we do have a little minor bet associated with that, which
do.
we'll see the results.
Yeah, I had full confidence that we would get a ton of results using kind of a secondary
multiple steps,
yeah,
versus
multiple
just my approach was just say put 1, 3, and 5
Yeah.
on the discussion question, because we couldn't make an overall. So
it's a popularity contest.
This is.
If you can copy paste, then this will be, which we all can.
So let me start out with the first subject that we had, and just as some background, I sent you the questions in advance, but also a couple other reference material that I'll be hitting upon along with some other folks here as we go through the webcast. So those were sent late yesterday. So take a look. The email is sent late yesterday to take a look at some of the verbiage that we'll be sharing. But the first off out of the chute is our 2018 to 2024 master plan, not 2014, I see it put there, but 2024 plan was approved unanimously by our state board. It was also approved unanimously by the local superintendent's advisory council, and that's very, very good. It's an outstanding thing to have accomplished. But to be honest with you, with all the things that we had going on with that one, very, very well supported in all aspects of it. And I appreciate folks' feedback and creating that. And I sent a note soon out to everybody after that was approved, which I'm not to go into the details of it, but that's the plan. It really doesn't start to take effect till next school year, and we'll start using it in July officially. But we're also taking a look at doing things with it now, because that's the direction that we're going. And so definitely when we present our annual Kentucky Education Technology System KETS Unmet Need and Expenditure Plan, will be based upon this 2018 to 2024 KETS Master Plan. Want to give you an update as far as I know on the budget status and the awareness of a variety of things, and just to educate you again, for those that are new or just for those that don't keep up with it, the Governor's Budget Office puts out an initial budget, and then it goes to the House, the Senate, and typically, in all my years here, it goes to a joint committee made up of X number of folks in the House and Senate, typically 5 or 8 folks in the House, Senate each, and then they get together and nail down some things that need to be done before it's submitted up for the Governor's Office final signature. So where it's at right now is the House still has it. And just to be honest with you, typically, and all the years I've been here, typically the House has already released it over to the Senate. And that's not happened yet, so they are still working on that version of the budget. And I did want to make folks aware that typically it will go to the Senate. It'll stay there for probably a month, so we won't get till the April, probably mid-April, before we really realize what the final budget is, because that's when that joint committee meets, is usually in early April, mid-April, right before the session ends. A lot of times it's on the very last day that they're working on that. But that's the timeline that we're along. And I know Commissioner Pruitt had a webcast for all the superintendents. He went over that initial budget, just not the parts that affect education technology, but all parts of the education budget. I want to make folks aware, especially those that we have that are new or may not have closely kept up with the finances over the years. And I'll just start out with this year, is with the budget cut that happened mid-year, is we gave out a couple of different options, and for districts, the KITS offers were not impacted, nor were any other like the internet services that we do, but we were impacted in Katie, the agency, absorbing that cut, that portion of the cut. It wasn't the full cut, but we absorbed it as an organization here, and definitely OET, Office of Education Technology, has absorbed that cut. Historically, over the past, since 2003, these cuts have been occurring. I think this is the 19th one or 20th one since that time frame. I think the budget cuts overall are around 25%, maybe up to 30% since that time. And most districts should notice that, if you take a look at the offers during that time, they've remained pretty steady. Our bandwidth has grown, and your usage has grown despite us not getting more funds, and actually the funds going down. And so, what I tell folks is, over the course of the years, we have been trying to be extremely frugal, find every different angle to maximize the dollars. But we're at a point now that where if there's another pretty significant budget cut that starts the next financial year, which is July, not only will we once again in OET be taking significant cuts, usually, and it's been over the years in personnel positions that have been not filled and eliminated permanently. We will also the districts will also be impacted. You saw earlier, I know the commissioner mentioned that KITS offers would be impacted if it goes the way it is now. We're hoping changes in the House and Senate, and that usually does occur, but we don't know if there'll be significant changes. And the internet services, the speeds that we have now, and what's related to those, you just got to turn the speeds down. It's just like a water faucet, as I explained to folks. And even when I was presenting the master plan to our board, they were asking the question about what is the impact if these cuts happen at this level. And I talked about those things I just talked about, but the rest of the department is impacted as well. There are major services that, while it's not in the SEEK funds, major services that districts count on with quality and fidelity, and those would go away, or those would be significantly impacted in quality. And I know not every, I know most districts are familiar with the contingency funds, saying we don't have enough contingency funds, and the buses being impacted. But there's a lot of things beyond that, and so we will see in April, probably mid-April, what's the status of those cuts and how severe are they, and that goes along with the discussion question that we had for you all to respond to. Is what would be most impacted to you all locally, and without knowing the percentage of cuts, which we don't know. If the cuts start happening, I know one of the EdTech leaders told me that within the districts too, they have tried to shield certain things from not being cut, but they're also at a point to where if another round of cuts comes, even locally to their funds, the technology funds, the funds that the district would normally send to the technology funds would be cut as well. So I think this apart, it is just helpful to me as I describe to folks your feedback along there. What are the most significant and overwhelming things that once again, trying to describe this to the average person, the public, and legislators, would be the impact of all these range of cuts to you locally. The ones that are shared services provided, the ones that are locally funded. What are the most significant things as we've described? And this is good for me to know going forward.
And Dave, you always do a great job of trying to educate as many folks as possible. And what we're getting into is trying to understand more clearly from everybody that domino effect of the things that are cut and how does that impact down the line. So we've opened up the discussion question.
Good
on that.
The next item, Chuck, and I think this is a appropriate place for you to come up and give us an update on where we are with the email, I call it upgrade and transition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now this is good news today. We are finally building what I would call some momentum moving forward. We've got 23 districts that have already migrated. That includes our pilots. We started our first full state wave, I call them waves, last week. We've got every district on the schedule, but less than a handful, due to be completed by the second week of May. And man, we're just making some really, really awesome progress at this point. All the documentation has been released into the wild, so every district should have access to our OneNote, which is really a repository we've put together for all of the documents associated with the projects, both from a Microsoft and an Amplified or Google standpoint. Looks like every district has completed the form where they identified their email choice, which is great, awesome. Thank you guys for that. And we're really kicking now with a head of steam. Now, granted, I mean, it's still a very tedious process, David, and I want our customers to know that we still continue to work with Amplified and Microsoft to ensure that we make this as smooth, as efficient as possible.
Yeah.
But so far, I feel like that we're really, really moving well, and I really appreciate all the districts that have been so cooperative
Right.
so far through all of this,
Right.
especially our pilot sites. I will always go back to our pilot sites, as well as those districts that were so willing in a really compressed time frame over the last week to get placed on a schedule so that we can get this done before the end of the fiscal year. And I just want to take a moment and speak to that, because I know a lot of folks asked some really good questions about why we're moving so aggressively, okay? You know, the partners that we've got lined up, just as well as our own staff, have got people and funds they've committed to help us complete this, that we're up against a fiscal year barrier on. Now, granted, if we run into big issues that can't be resolved or resolved in a timely fashion, we can slip things. But at the end of this, we've got some cleanup we've got to do on our end, on the backside. You know, we've got some customized infrastructure we've got to pull out. That's going to take some time. We've got a bunch of stuff that's been left in this mega tenant that we've got to clean up. So we're trying to slate about 6 weeks at the end of the fiscal year to do all that cleanup and wrap up, which is why that second week of May is our target to have all districts migrated. But no, we're feeling really good right now about where we're going. I encourage every district to make sure that now you're looking over the documentation, okay? We're going to be scheduling weekly calls to go over that documentation with those districts in that respective wave, and there's going to be a wave every single week that goes. So we're going to make sure you have ample opportunity to pose questions, to hear from the camps. I know that the Amplified group has been reaching out already to all the customers that are opting to move to Gmail.
Right.
And talking through kind of their positioning, their assistance they can provide in the migration. And Microsoft does a great job on the weekly calls, kind of walking people through all that they need to do to prepare and how it's going to flow and what's going to be impacted when we've got office hours opened for questions the day after people migrate.
Right.
So, you know, I feel like we've got a good structure in place, and I feel like we've got some good momentum we're starting to build.
Now, when you say we were going to have a webcast where people can do some sharing.
Yeah, we're wanting to do it one more webcast, either this week or next week. We want to make sure we get the timing down for the benefit of everybody. And really, we want to have a couple of our pilot sites provide some good testimony as to, specifically from an execution perspective, okay? What did they do well in planning and communicating, and what do they wish they could have done better? So it's not necessarily a call to get into technical specifics of the project, as much as it's more about what did you do as a leader to prepare your district to be successful. Because at the end of the day, that's really, I guess, the secret sauce in all of it. It's
Right.
how well did you communicate? How well did you prepare your staff? How well did they know what was coming? You know, from leadership all the way down to, I'm going to say, the bus driver. Because it impacts everybody based on a lot of different things. So that's really what we want to focus on, is just to give everybody some good lessons learned.
And the percentages are 65-35?
I think right now we've got 63 districts that have chosen Gmail, 110 that have chosen Office 365 Mail. So that's where we're at.
So I don't know what that percentage is, but
It's about
typically
65-35, yeah.
62, right around that range.
There's a point something in
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So this is a time that I wanted us to focus in on the assurances that, so you can open up, let me
Yep.
tell give Andy the question. I don't know if there's any other questions that we mind just not just going ahead and opening up, because they can change those.
Open them all up.
Open them all up? Okay. So I sent you yesterday by email the assurances that all your superintendents are signing. And so for, new CIOs, you may not be aware of that, and EdTech leaders, and other roles that you play in the district. And for the ones being around, you may not realize that's happening every year. So I wanted, first thing to know, you realize your superintendent is signing that every year, and how well are you really following what they're signing? I would advise you to follow what they're signing. And there's 3 particular ones in there I wanted to point out today, the parts you're signing. It's the ones about the email product standards. And basically around, districts are only supposed to use the email product standards, and right now we have 2, Microsoft and Google, and only the inspectable ones, the
correct.
enterprise ones, not the
Correct.
personal ones.
That's correct.
And so I'm gonna let you all both talk about that, and there's other parts of that. Just as you know, my apprehension, I'll just be upfront with you, is whenever I would go to STLP events, and I would ask students a wide range of things. And when they talked about why can't you unblock Gmail, when I went through all the things, I said, here, tell me what Microsoft Mail can't do compared to Gmail. They really couldn't say anything. As I went through it, the main reason, and this was close to 99.9% of the time, they said, basically, I don't want you to be able to inspect what I'm doing. And that tells me they have a blind spot about what Gmail means for them in a school setting while they're doing school work. So as we have, and as you know, one superintendent made a comment that made me really worry, that they're not realizing this is not a free-for-all for personally used Gmail in classrooms. And there are clear, it's clearly prohibited by a regulation. And that, by the way, the superintendent is signing off on every year.
So David, I think the really nice part about this annual process is putting these assurances, and we actually have 10 that we tie back to EdTech, like education technology related items.
And those are the 10 that we sent.
The 10 that we
last night,
sent.
yeah.
And we this is our hot 10 that reference either federal law, state law, and one of those pieces that you mentioned, and it's hit on in a couple different pieces in the superintendent assurances that help push this conversation in the district. And one of those is the acceptable use policy, which speaks to, and actually the KSBA, so I'm tying a couple things together here.
Yeah.
The KSBA Policies and Procedures Manual, which almost all of our districts subscribe to, get into this issue of personal use or personal tools. And so I think that's important to tie back to the superintendent assurances, to clean it up a bit, to tie it up. And the big deal in the superintendent assurance that you're referencing is as the reg states it, is third party or non-standard use. The other way to say that is personal accounts. And so trying to put that in front of our superintendents to, again, ask that question of, do you have measures in place to understand that? In every district, there are applications that get interesting, the one-offs, like students who are taking courses externally, or the scenario that we've spoken to before on a webcast is if your district is using Office 365 mail moving forward and you have teachers that want to get Google certified.
While they're in the
Right.
school building.
While they're in the school
Because they can do
building.
that at home and a variety of other places, but while they're in the school
Right.
building.
And so understanding the application of that. But the point that you're making here is to really ensure that the understanding of not using personal email accounts. And the reg is very specific to speaking to email.
So anyone that's ever dealt with me talking about strategies will know almost where the first thing I will say when we're talking about one is, don't focus in on the 1% of the 1% items. We write those down on a board, but there's a tendency in talking about this, someone will bring some obscure 1% thing over and let that drive the other 99%. And so what I do is I say, well, I'm not ignoring that. Let's write that really, really rare instant over here. And let's talk about how we deal with it, but we don't open it up or do things because of that 1% of 1%.
Correct.
But we do find a way to deal with this. So if you take a look at the percentage of all the students in Kentucky that are taking a dual credit course from a university that only offers or offers the choice of Google, that is a really small number. Most of our public universities are Office 365. Murray State is the exception, and that would always come up that they don't allow Office 365. So for the child that's taking a dual credit, most likely in Western Kentucky from Murray State, I don't know how many that number is compared, but that's not a huge number. That's in the 1% category. But we wanted to address that 1%. That's why I said it's not ignored. Let's go and design it here, but let's circle back and let's take a solution for that. The other really rare exception for a small window of time is for the teacher, and it could even be a student, that wants to get their Google certification. That doesn't mean that's opened up all the time. That is a very small window. Can you open it up? Obviously, Lightspeed has the ability for a very small period of time to manage that, as with the student at taking a course, the dual credit course at
By putting
Murray
folks
State.
in different groups.
By putting
right?
folks in different groups, and that's what that tool does, as it allows you to differentiate and do it for small periods of time. So that is not a 99% thing. That is a less than 1% amount of window that has to be open for students to do that. Number of students and just the amount of window has to be open for teachers and students to take those certifications while they're in their classroom. Those are two items that, in talking with folks, it was tough to justify not unblocking for those when you're explaining to the average person, so they were. But what we can't have happen over time, people just say, well, everything's open now. And when we have an incident, and I suspect one's going to happen where personal Gmail has been used and it's not been properly monitored by the district.
Right.
This is where we're going to point back to. The assurances that the superintendent is signing and webcasts like this to make sure you're aware of it. So part of it is I want to make sure for that one, and we'll talk about a security one that your superintendent is signing and the importance of that. You'd be aware of that, especially if you have an incident that happens. Is it possible for us to say, let me give you the number, because Andy needs a number of the question that we're
Yeah, we can
asking for that
show,
one.
we're getting some good responses back.
Okay, so question one should be the one you should be able to bring up. And once again, just because we passed by it now, doesn't, well, my goodness, that,
So this is good.
Yeah, that's good.
So,
That's
so
good.
let me
That's
speak to
good.
that just.
Good information.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
great
that's good.
information,
Yeah.
and that's why we're talking about it today.
Yeah,
Because I think, David, I'm gonna raise the conversation one step above personal email for a second, okay? Because when you read the reg, and I think it's fascinating whether it's some of the early regs that were put in place or the early laws that govern our education technology program, much like, I hate to compare it to the Constitution, but I'm going to. I'm talking about laws that stand the test of time. I'm talking about things that are put in place years ago anticipating that something would be needed that even today when you look at it, you go, oh, wow. So when you really dive into the reg, 701 KR 5.120, it speaks to more than just email. And I just want to take a second and talk about the fact that we all have what I call, and we've used this term before, duty of care in the public sector to make sure that anything and everything we do is hyper transparent, is inspectable. That's the term we've used for a couple of years now. And to be very pointed, is subject to open records. That's what it comes down to. So I think it's hyper important for our EdTech leaders, our school district leaders, our teachers, our students, everybody, to understand very clearly the things you do that are work related,
Yes.
okay, or school related. You need to use stuff, tools that are inspectable, okay?
And sponsored by the
And
school.
sponsored by the school district. And I'm a big believer that you use the personal tools for personal stuff, you use the school tools for school stuff.
as you do in life.
As
when
you
they-
do in life.
As they go to any employer, the employers, I mean, you go to any university. The university, I know my son's at Northern Kentucky University, and he is told to check his Office 365 account multiple times during the day, the university issued, not his personal one.
Right.
And part of it is they're trying to get them used to in life,
Right.
much like the employees here, they shouldn't be using their personal email account
Correct.
for personally related types of things.
correct.
It's a life skill.
It is a life skill.
You're trying to teach them.
Just as Bob Hackworth would tell you, as our chief security officer, that if you've got sensitive data, top secret data, that data shouldn't be stored in your personal Dropbox account or a personal cloud storage account.
Right.
Because unfortunately, David, you mentioned if we have an incident. And that's where people have to understand that in the event of an incident, the personal stuff by law is not inspectable. Okay? And I think that's a key point we need to make sure our leaders understand and continue to emphasize and educate every single year.
And I think that's what we're speaking to, is that's where I think these assurances for superintendents come into play, where I think it's very clear we're getting some really good feedback that if we jump through the soapbox questions, Andy, so number 3, it tells us that we're aware of the email.
So I did want to tell you, this goes back to make sure the choice you made about whatever email system you want to use and how you deploy it was not just a technical one.
Right.
You better be working on the people side of this. That your teachers, your principals, your superintendent understands what this means and what does this not mean, way beyond the widget technical
Correct.
parts of this.
That's correct.
And that is probably what is alarming me, and it's always alarmed me about this, is how well have folks been doing that in educating folks? We're getting ready to go at a pretty good pace here. Folks have known this is coming for a year. How well have you been preparing your folks beyond the technical widget side?
That's correct.
So,
Well, I think, and the reason this is so important now, and I think we've been saying this, is that we're inducing some changes and some options and some opportunities here
timing.
that in the past folks haven't really had to worry about it or be concerned.
right.
And so, I mean, I think that's the significance of this conversation right now.
Well, I think the other part is just the basis of that 1998 law was safety and security of students. And we know other things going on in the country. There is a major focus on safety and security of students. And did you take the steps, while you can't stop the person that, that's determined, has opportunity time to do certain things? You can't stop them, but at least you have to have some boundaries that say, this is the way we are operating. And it is inappropriate to cross these things, and you just can't ignore them within a school building to say, I know there's a reg, I know there's this, I'm just not going to do it. I got to tell you, because just the safety and security of the students, but also if it goes bad, and it's shown that you just kind of lackadaisically did not respond to this or ignored it, that's not a good place for you to be.
Well, and I think the other
Bob's
point,
got it.
oh, yes, Bob.
Oh, and David, I wanted to remind everyone that this isn't a hypothetical conversation.
Right.
No.
We've had instances in the past, I can think of several just off the top of my head, where we had to assist a school district in retrieving access to information because the federal government needed to come in and see that information.
But it wasn't just federal government, it's law enforcement. It's
Law
local
enforcement
law enforcement. I just
and
want
the
folks to
FBI.
look at it, the federal folks or the state folks. This is typically local involved with, as you're saying, the FBI typically is involved with these things.
And so we've been through this before, and a lot of our new folks out there may not remember that, but we've been through this before, and that's why, that's another reason why we really want to ensure that everyone understands the importance of using the organization, the inspectable resources.
And I
While
think,
you're at school, using skill resources.
That's right.
Resources, yeah, go ahead.
well, I think this is just such a great opportunity. Mike, you pointed out, timing-wise, it's a perfect opportunity. But additionally, I think our feedback that we're getting through Go Soapbox, a high percentage of folks are aware of the reg, but maybe a much lower percentage of us as EdTech leaders across the state were not aware that our superintendents annually have to sign an assurance annually, right? So every year that there's an assurance in place to keep this top of mind, keep it important. And so, like we said earlier, it's kind of closing this loop on, and we've talked about with our field staff, our CATS engineers, and our
Yep.
digital learning coaches as keeping these big topics top of mind. I think that's important. Closing the loop from the reg in application to annually what superintendents are saying. And I think that helps push the conversation a little bit further.
Well, and I would think it's too, it's much like we really push on the safety part, the security part, Bob, that we do, all districts supposed to do by every
Mhm.
August. Are you having this kind of conversation with your superintendent every year?
Right.
Going through these 10 items and having conversation versus them just signing it. So part of what we try to do is just remind folks there are things, or as you have people come in going from your positions, or folks that have been there for a while, is just reminding folks to get certain things on the radar screen. If there's a good reason behind them, and once again, you can't stop 100% of stuff folks trying to abuse something or cause chaos, but you can certainly reduce it pretty significantly, reduce the odds of it.
Absolutely. Well, and David, one more point, and I think this is always important. I think the percentage of folks, whether it's adults or minors, that are looking to do something maliciously falls into that 1% category you talked about just a
Yep,
while ago.
that's right.
I think a lot of times what you've got is just some folks that didn't realize, unknowingly, I'm going to use a tool that, oh, by the way, fits a need that I've got, okay? Didn't realize there's this whole organizational owned versus personally owned thing. And that's why I think it's critical that here's what we don't need to do. Because a lot of times we can swing the pendulum to one extreme and say, then let's block everything.
Yeah.
As opposed to every single year, and I'm a big believer in this, especially knowing that you've got some folks that maybe haven't even seen an AUP for years. I think it's really important, and part of our conversation with the team in the last month, our field staff, has been districts need to consider real strongly every single year at least pushing on some of the assurances and some of the requirements in an AUP, just to at least make sure folks, it's out in front of them on an annual basis, and they understand what's appropriate and what's not.
In fact, that AUP conversation is one of the assurances.
Absolutely,
It is.
absolutely.
It's just, I think what we're doing right now is potentially changing the value proposition of the assurances
Yep.
for pushing.
And I think more
technology.
importantly with all these parts is have a discussion. Don't just say, well, Katie says, somebody says, there are good reasons behind this. There are safety and security reasons behind these. Educate your folks on it. Don't say, well, you just can't use personal email because Katie says. I mean, ultimately, there's a law behind it. But as you know, the way we operate and have operated for over 2 decades is we don't typically say, well, the law. We spend a lot more time in educating why that is
The
important.
spirit of the law.
The spirit of the law, why that's there. So have those discussions with your superintendent as you're going through here, and have honest discussions, how well, and I don't know if I saw the responses to how we said, are you aware? I'm interested in responses to the ones just saying,
How confident.
how confident are you that it's happening?
So number 2. Yep.
Number 2,
Okay.
yeah.
Good.
So we can improve there.
Oh,
Yeah.
We can get better
absolutely.
there.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think there's one we asked the email one, is that number 4? How confident is you think it was beyond your awareness, but it was now how well you doing?
And I think the reason this audience is so key to this conversation, and David, I'm going to use you as a guinea pig here, okay? In the event that there's an incident at KDE and something like this goes bad, who's the commissioner going to come find first?
Always me.
It's always going to be you.
Because it has electricity involved in some way, it's got the internet involved in some way, it's data, voice, and video being stored or transporting, or it's got the word digital in it.
I mean, I'm very confident that when superintendents sign that every year, those assurances,
Right.
they sign it assuming somebody's got this,
Yep.
somebody's got my back, and they're protecting me in this. So I think it's a responsibility of our EdTech leaders to make sure that within the leadership team of a school district, people are aware of this and are embracing this and are owning, making sure that folks understand.
So read those searches. I'd encourage you to go through those. And some of those are tweaked every year. We're in the process. Do we use different wording now for some of those? And we're reviewing them. Going forward, obviously, if you have any suggestions for those, the wording of those, let us know that. This is the right timing as we're looking for the next round of what superintendents will be signing as far as these assurances.
And Andy, as we close this topic out, can you pull up number 3.5? We added a 0.5 to get it in there. But this is what David's referring to as annually we touch on these to make sure that they align with all the important topics. This is one, while there is an assurance in place right now that references breach notification, which again is a great annual conversation. There's the part about working with cloud vendors and ensuring that the cloud vendor is not using student data inappropriately.
Yep.
And it looks like pretty favorable that might open up a conversation with the superintendent
Yep.
on that.
Yep.
Good.
Thank you, Andy. And you're doing well with this.
He is.
We gave him all of 3 minutes to prepare for this webcast. It's usually more than we give you, Andy. So let's talk about the CIO summit coming up in March. I want to remind folks that if you've never participated on it, just remind them, make a strong plug to attend that. These are things. We usually pick 2 or 3. Sometimes we go to 4 of things we want your feedback on that we're anticipating taking action on. Let me give you an example from just last year. We had 3 topics. Topic 1 was the people side of EdTech. As a reminder, we completed a study on that, actionable item, along with a slideshow that I am traveling across the state, which I'm going to talk a little bit to all the co-ops, all the major groups with. So that is something that we listened to your feedback, fine-tuned it, and took an actionable item associated with that. Topic number 2 was the Microsoft Office 365 and Gmail, or in G Suite actually, was the full range. What do we do with that going forward? Obviously, we just gave an update. That
Correct.
wasn't just you're talking, we're never listening.
Correct.
These are 2 items that you talked and we responded.
We shifted major after
We
the
shifted
summit.
a major
Absolutely.
position.
It was good.
Number 3 was, what do we have to do to try to address the funding issue in the next upcoming legislative session? Now, obviously, we're talking about the budget cuts, but just so a win associated with that is actually the budget that was submitted by KD actually had higher amounts that was approved by our board. It talked about, as a goal of that session was, and the action item had, is raising the cuts baseline, just not, to restore the cuts that have happened over the past 15 years and go above that, to deal with, the cost of ownership issues and the anticipated growth. Our board listened to that. It was approved and it was submitted to the legislature. Now, we've talked about that was not addressed, but that was a win.
Correct.
And your feedback gave us the what we needed to support those actions. So take this very seriously, and once again, if you've never been to one of those, I encourage you to do it just as a reminder. We typically, as the OET staff, will introduce the topic for 3 to 5 minutes, and then we really are listening to all the tables. So this is actually, this thickness of it is all the feedback we got from every table. I carry this with me for the course of the year to see how well we did addresses. We'll do the same thing.
Correct.
And I'm pretty sure last year we took the summary of all the tables and shared that with that, so everybody could see whatever the key points, whatever table would say for that. So I'd ask you to take a look at these 8, and let me tell you what these 8 choices are from. They're mainly from our master plan, our newest master plan. These are big goals that we identified going forward. We beefed up one of them based upon your feedback, your end-of-year feedback that we got from 173 districts. Once again, listening to you and adjusting, we beefed up one of the questions associated with the contracts, mainly around which new ones do we have to have, but also added which ones do we have now that we probably should eliminate. They've lost their value. And that was based upon the feedback we got from you at the end of December. We added another one around the technology planning, mainly based upon our team huddle that we had with our OAT staff. So, and I don't know if there's a way to see the feedback so far we've gotten.
There is, just as a reminder, in Go Soapbox, copy that URL to the easy form. It's a one question form.
And we'll leave this open too.
Yeah.
So all these questions, don't feel like they pass me by and we're not looking at them. Anytime throughout the rest of the webcast, and we usually leave this open for how long?
Several days.
Several days.
As
Go
folks
ahead.
watch the
Yeah,
archive.
but that's not, because I really actually need the feedback on this. Don't wait several days. I'll say 2 days is you have to fill this one out, but it'd be nice to see just where we're at with it right now. So as and I know you're just doing the short, let's see, the long.
Identify and address the most crucial education technology professional development
Okay,
needs.
so that's the PD, okay,
Yeah, that's the PD one.
okay,
And this is changing rapidly as folks are
Yeah,
completing.
yeah.
But the next one was, what new contracts should we consider
Okay,
adding as an option for districts?
all right. Higher education is trying to make a connection with getting teachers a better run and go and leaving, yeah.
Right.
Data systems we talked about in the past, but I still think it's an important one of how do we maximize the ones we have. And we'll take that into consideration, but we still got to get to the point where we're maximizing it, or we got to bring that to a different group of folks that really is focused in on our data systems overall. And that may not be, in a majority of our districts, the person's identified as the CIO, an EdTech leader.
Well, and David, I think it's important that we continue to emphasize the spirit of the summit. I mean, the spirit of the summit is not for us to provide some type of an update on the
Right.
technology initiative.
Right.
It's for us to throw some strategic topics on the table, some problems that we know that people are wrestling to solve, either at the state level or at the district level. Come together with our, what I consider our community, our village, all right, and put our heads together, and what's some good feedback we can get on how to solve that problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, I guess I get the, have a higher percentage. That was number 3 was,
Right.
that was not the higher ed one. The higher ed one is the one that's called Create Deep. Have a higher percentage of folks maximizing what they already have.
Education technology
Yeah,
investments.
how do we do that?
Yeah.
What new contracts? Okay, got you with that one. Expand opportunities for students to code and.
So we're up to 10 responses in the form. So let's, if you can, go ahead and go to another tab browser, and don't make me wrong on this, please. I don't.
So far, I'm right in the number of people that were able to maneuver that. We'll see.
That's not a.
See.
We're able to. They're still going.
Okay, they're still going.
It's
Okay,
a
all
long
right.
question. That's
I
a
want to
long
be wrong. I want that to be a really high number
Yeah.
versus the way I suggested. So I'm hoping your number is really high number.
You don't want to be right.
I don't want to be right about that one.
Cool.
A quick status, the people side, I had a successful, and you can imagine, I'm not going to get standing ovation as I'm going to these co-ops of telling them about the people side of it is the certain roles they should have and the impacts of not having those roles picked. But I did go to KDC, and it was not it was on the second day of it, and so it wasn't the full audience of that, and I'll probably circle back to that one. I did go to the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. That's the one I typically go to once a month, just as being assigned from that. So that's kind of a safe place for me with superintendents. I have a long relationship with that co-op and the superintendents. And the only thing I feel bad, I didn't give a heads up to the district EdTech leaders that I was getting ready to do that. And we're going to do that with this one, is we're scheduling them, the Ks know, to let you know that I'm going to be there. But I would say the feedback I've gotten from those two is why the superintendent's no standing ovation, and I tell them up front, there is no good time to talk about this. But before you start buying a whole lot more things, you better start considering, do you have enough people to make sure it's reliable, make sure it's secure, make sure it's maximized. And a good, just an overall good experience for the students and teachers. Your intentions are good, but you're not dealing with the people side of it. And that goes with the data too. Are you ensuring that the data is being maximized and it's not all siloed up in your organization? So if nothing else I get from this is typically they go, boy, we need to show a little bit more love and appreciation for the technology staff that we have, because what I show them is all the things they're doing and all the things have been added onto their plate. The security systems that are now responsible because it's electronic connection to it, connection to the heating and air conditioning systems that are out there. The new electronic whiteboards that are out there connecting all those and being responsible for them, getting no more people. So I do find they're much more appreciative of it. So once again, as we're trying to get the schedule here month by month, because typically all these co-ops meet on the same exact day. So it's taken me a time to spread it out, but I'm going to go to the bigger events. And we'll do this a variety of ways. This is a tool that we're going to use for quite a period of time. But,
David, I think it's also important, something that you've, I guess another trick you've pulled out of your bag of tricks in regards to the people side of EdTech. The year one in the last year has been constructing information that would at least make superintendents aware of the problem. And ultimately, you're right, the timing for this conversation is not good. But I think the other thing you've done as of recently is boiled the ocean down to that tablespoon of salt for a superintendent and really given them three choices. Because when you think about this entire conversation, they've really got a decision they've got to make, and they've got three doors they can walk through. What are those three?
Well, one of the doors is, and obviously it's the one that I'm recommending, is address it. If you're going to keep on buying at this rate, then address the people side of it. But obviously, my option number one that I open up with is start taking the stuff out of your schools. If you are not going to match the number of people needed with the items that you have, and you're expecting high reliability and it's being maximized and it's secure and you're maximizing data, then you need to match the number of people you have. So start taking it out and definitely stop buying it until you can do that. Now we know the difficulty, we've seen the infographic of, they're buying at this kind of rate.
Oh, yeah.
And our people side, they're investing in those or eliminating those, which is incredibly alarming that's occurring. So I start out with that because I go, yes, I know it's a horrible budget situation, but you do have an option. Take it out or stop buying it, definitely at the rates that you're buying it. Address the people, or you accept lower, you keep on buying at the rates with the same number of people you have, but you should not be doing the beatdown of your technical staff, no matter what their position on, it's not reliable. Because you can't keep that. You should not do the beatdown of them that it's not being maximized. All these investments are not being maximized because you don't have the right people.
So you should lower your expectations.
You need a significantly lower your expectation of, it's being maximized, it's secure, and it's reliable. And that's the part we're just showing the love is, okay, this is what I'm doing to them. So I do give them three very doable options.
Yeah.
And I do find them receptive. Once again, they don't stand ovation, but I did get KVAC, after I said, they kind of clapped.
Appreciate
They
that.
clapped it. They just don't know. It's the Lucy thing
golf-
is that,
it's golf clap.
and it's a golf clap. It's a very polite golf clap. But the Lucy thing gets them every time. And obviously it's been interesting of a certain people age, and I'm sure there's a lot watching this webcast. They don't know what I'm talking about, Lucy and the Chocolate Factory, that 60-second clip. And then so someone said, I don't know what that means, so I kind of describe it. But those that have seen that, no matter what your age, they go, yep, that's what's happening to our technical staffs in schools. And I'm just telling you what they're not telling you because they're just saying, I'm gung-ho, I can make this all work, but they're just being completely overloaded associated with it. So we'll make you aware of it, but so far, so good. We'll see if I go to more difficult territory, how well that's received. I may not even get a golf clap, they may get thrown at me. But
I think an important awareness on this topic is that there is no magic bullet. I mean, there is no, it is about awareness, it is about choices, and there are some things that can be done that are creative to be able to address this area, but the fact that we're always and continuously dealing with budget challenges, it makes it a very,
That's correct.
a very impossible thing to have the magic answer that solves it completely. So people shouldn't expect that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
This is not delivering, this is the magic answer as much as these are the options, this is awareness.
And we continue to hear from our EdTech leaders tuned in today and watch this archive that the more we continue to keep this specific conversation going, that it's helpful.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. I want to talk to you about, our master plan is two parts. One is our greatest hits album and the things we want to do forward. And the best document we have in there is the KITS timeline. And it's it's a one-page print of both the back. And whenever I talk to folks, it's always, and even when I present it to the board every time, those groups, they're all the time, I had no idea you all had done this much and had this much credibility. These great hits over a period of time. And it's always important for us to remind folks, because if you don't know what's already happened and in place and a good experience, folks don't think it exists. And they may build something in complete duplication of it. And we've had a couple instances of that I like to point out. There was some legislation that was proposed that said you all need to do something with digital citizenship. Not understand we're probably the national leader. We were the national leader, still are. Trying to get that on the radar screen.
Kentucky had that in place prior to the federal.
That's right, federal law. Obviously, we're doing the digital driver's license. Our emphasis, you can see them in the assurances.
The superintendent's assurance.
Yeah. And our tracking of that progress in our digital readiness, and also the laws that were in place. The ones we talked about here earlier around the inspectability.
Yeah.
That was all about internet safety and security.
Correct.
But once again, you have legislators coming, going, or forgetting, and we've done it so long ago, even ones that have been around for a while don't realize we did that 2 decades ago. And it's working incredibly well. The other thing that would be in that category that a good number of legislators don't know is all of our schools are connected to the internet.
With fiber.
How
about
at
that?
a very high speeds. And so obviously there's an initiative called Kentucky Wire that's going on that is a separate kind of thing. That you just got to educate folks on, and we have to do here regularly, is something that could help students at their homes right now if that got in place and there was a local provider that connected to that. But our schools are already connected, and our district offices are already connected. One that came really apparent is the state, and we have a good relationship with North Carolina, have had, because they look at things statewide and have for a long period of time. So I get a call from them, this was 2 weeks ago, and it was like going back to 1993. They're looking at doing a statewide financial management system, and we're wondering if any state had ever done that, and they were pointed to Kentucky. And I got to tell you, where they're at today is where we were at in 1993, is the number of homegrown ones they have for certain districts, particularly large ones, and the 30 to 50 ones they got throughout the state, and they recognize that doesn't work well when you're trying to make apples and apples, and for all the reasons we have, product standards. And so, part of it is that most of our public doesn't understand is the significant overwhelming advantage in cost savings, efficiencies, from a lot of different perspectives of having product standards. And sitting there having that discussion, and you could tell the person said, "You're telling me we're 25 years behind you?" I said, "Yes." Most states in this category and many others are still decades behind us. Not only were they the first, but they're still decades behind. And once again, whenever I ask, what state has got, was the first state to have everything, connected to these, they always point to California, which I have no idea why, because California is one of the most pitiful in almost every one of these categories. But part of it is just educate them on and also appreciate what we have in place, because folks coming and going might not realize we have a standardized financial management system and how really awesome that is. And you're right, 48 other states don't. Arkansas has one. It's a homegrown one, I think. We're the only one that's really done off the shelf, and I think eventually, and North Carolina is not doing homegrown, They're looking to do much like we did, 25 years ago.
So before you leave that point, David, I just want to reemphasize, because we hear this from our field staff all the time, and I think it's a critical point, for folks to understand. I mean, we've tried hard over the years to stay out of the politics of any situation. We just do. But, I've heard folks mention, you guys spend a lot of time looking back and talking about things you've done, thumping our chest, patting ourselves on the back. And it's not an us. It's an us as in the village we talk
That's
about.
right, all the district. Yeah.
But the reason we do that is because every 4 years and every 2 years, agendas change.
And
I'm-
people change.
And people change. And
And
that's not a
leadership
partisan
position.
statement, it's a fact.
That's right.
And all we try to do is say, look, guys, all right, as the agendas change, before you come out with some wild idea that we've already addressed
And done well, and
and
doing
done well,
And
right,
national leader in.
see that and recognize that, especially knowing you got a master plan
Yeah.
that covers a 6-year span, which crosses that 4-year magic mark.
But
and
I'm
the
saying
2-year
it
mark.
goes to your superintendents. They change.
Absolutely.
Educate them. They typically talk to these legislators and others. It's important
Who
for them
also
to know.
change.
Correct.
They also change.
Absolutely.
So once
Absolutely.
again, if no one knows it's there, you have great probabilities of duplication.
Yes.
And building a complete, just like this, if we don't, we're not saying, because at least we did find out the digital citizenship, we've already done it. You would have seen another one go way down the pike.
Yep.
And I'd say it's here. Now that they saw it, they go, okay, I didn't realize.
So the point you're making there is, when we say we've already done it, we already have a policy in place that is pretty complete and goes full circle all the way to superintendent assurances. Now we get to work on implementing it as opposed to recreating new policy, like maybe some other states are.
So I tell you, it works, and it's important. As you're saying, it's just not. This is not. It is all of us. The success
Correct.
of this of KETS over 25 years is not Katie the agency.
No.
It is all the. I mean, the amazement I get from my peers is all the districts that are going in the same direction. Has never been done before. In all these years, and the averages that we've done it, and the success we've had with it. I mean, it is quite remarkable. But it's one to say you cherish it and you defend it. It's important to do it. Just not sitting there, but you're taking people through the logic set of why that's important. But it's been interesting to go back. We had the P20 Innovation
Right.
Event in Scott County, which was neat. So we had, one of the folks from UK there,
Right.
Justin Bathard, who's been a great champion for us, but once again recognized in front of the audience the historic things we've done. And once again, those are teachers from all over. These are progressive digital leaders, and a very high percentage of them are unaware, even those
Right.
folks, of the things already in place and the significance of that.
Exactly.
But just getting this one-to-one, that's a pretty significant kind of thing, a milestone. It's not one every child's carrying it, but pretty significant milestone that we now have that allows really things like, the testing, the summative and the interim testing to really start happening. That's just one example, but there's many other instructional ones that start happening at a
We
bigger
can
rate.
actually focus on all the way across the state. We can focus on getting to the work,
Yep.
and using the digital tools as opposed to.
So we
maybe
remove
some
the
other-
access barriers.
Bob, before we talk about cybersecurity, I did want to, and I'm not to spend a lot on the OEA study. And typically OEA, we have representatives that watch these webcasts, and we encourage them to do that. We did meet with OEA representatives, and particularly at OEA, they have an arm in their organization that does the studies and research. And we met with them to point out a couple of things. One is the information that we already collect from districts and the digital readiness.
Right.
So they've been provided that, and they're looking through that, along with the other studies that they have done, along with some other organizations have done in the past. So as I sent you in the note last night, I gave you some background that I would encourage you to look at, as far as that little 3-minute clip about OEA's background, which I think is well worth watching. So actually 3 minute. It talks about the full range of what they do, and once again, that OEA is really a separate organization. And I know most folks don't know what OEA does and their mission and where they're organizationally, but it was intentionally created to be outside the Department of Education. It is completely independent, so that's not one of our offices that'll be doing that study. I told you about the study in the note that I sent, and the other two that are there. And just to get a heads up, a survey will be sent. And I'm not sure what will be in that survey or not. It could be, and OEA's not said anything about it, is they've done some analysis of the data they have seen. They may have some follow-up, or we've not collected certain things that they need as part of this study and the ways they're focusing in on the digital tools used for instruction. And they are planning to do some on-site visits. And just wanted to give you a heads up, and they know, give you a heads up today, so I wrote it all out there, not going in depth with it. Bob, would like to circle back to one of the assurances that superintendent signed, and that is along the range of are you doing the following things and informing the following about data security. So obviously, any incident that happens is you definitely want to have said, we have done that. And this may be the chance. I've always said sometimes it takes something going bad for people to say, okay, this stuff you were telling me now, what was that you were saying again? I wasn't paying attention much before, but I'm really paying attention now. And you were trying to give us words of wisdom, and we're trying to listen to you, but we really weren't giving you that respect or whatever you want to call it to listen to what you're saying. Looks like you were right. Now I'm going to pay a little bit closer attention to you. And so I would just say for all of you is if you have a security incident that happens, and you have not done that step right there, and you got to explain to folks while it happened, and you didn't go through these steps of making sure your superintendent and board was aware of proper, the things going, you have strengths in and weaknesses in and vulnerabilities in, that's not a good place for you to be in as the EdTech leader, but as the district to be in. So I always like you to give a little bit of it can happen to you, kind of words of wisdom, Bob, because we've had an incident that has happened. We're not going to say the district's name, but this could be in a district any place.
David, I couldn't have said any of that any better, and I feel like I could probably just get up and walk away now. but seriously, we did have, and actually this year, 2018, has been a bad year for data breaches for Kentucky districts. 2015 was bad because that's when we first experienced a year with the new legislation that required notification of data breaches. And so I think everyone was trying to feel their way through that. 2016 was okay. We only had 2 to 3 out in the districts of data breaches. 2017, we had a handful. 2018, we've already equaled the numbers that we had back in 2016 for the whole year, and we're barely 2 months into the year. So things are kind of going maybe a little downhill right now. The things that have been happening most recently, the good news is, if there is any good news, these are data breaches that could be stopped by being or paying a little more attention. These aren't hackers overcoming giant walls of technology getting into us. These are people being careless. And that's really what a lot of our data breaches are right now, are people being careless, whether it's through a phish, someone sends an email and asks a staff person for their username and password, and that staff person happily replies with the username and password. They get tricked to do that. Or if it's someone just accidentally posting information, which is what's happened most recently, posting information to a publicly accessible website, and that information contains things like Social Security's, whatever deductions they may have in payroll, that sort of information, and then it's up there until someone tells the district that, hey, this stuff is up there.
Right.
And then you're in that game of trying to figure out who's seen it, how long has it been visible, is this a data breach? Very likely it's going to be a data breach because the likelihood of someone not seeing it is going to be very, very small. Folks are out there actively looking for that sort of information. And that's what we've had most recently, and it can impact an entire district. It can impact all the students. It can impact your district's reputation. It can damage the way parents and teachers feel about their school district, which is a hole you really don't want to get down into, to be honest. And we have some districts right now who are actively fighting that and trying to regain that reputation. And it's really tough to do that, which is a real problem. Not to mention the amount of time and effort and money that the folks who lost their information are going to have to spend to try to get that, try to add some additional security to their identities. So it's a huge problem. 2018, like I said, looks to be going in a bad direction right now. I'm asking everyone to kind of make sure your staff are aware of the easiest ways that they can lose the information, and then conversely, the easiest ways they can keep hold of that information.
So Bob, this is one of the topics that they had a chance to choose from, these 8. What can we do, and it's a big goal we have in the master plan, to get this on the radar screen of the average teacher and student? That is our biggest hole. Not that we don't, there's these other ones that can come through, but we've pretty much mitigated a good number of those, not to challenge all the hackers out there. Our people side is our weakest link by far. This was a people side
Definitely.
error. And typically when these happen, we first get the call, well, there must have been a breach. They breached during time. Nope.
No.
I mean, I don't want that. I don't want it to happen anyway.
Yeah.
Breach doesn't equal technical vulnerability.
That's right.
That's
So
right.
so it is a big issue, and that's why we'll take a look at your feedback. But that's one for me that we'll take a look at that may stay there. Is how do we get this for real on the radar screen of teachers and of students?
Well, there's been 23 votes,
Yeah.
actually.
And we've done everything we can to a certain extent. Every time we go out, we express how this can happen to you, and we provide data about Kentucky, not just Kentucky, but K-12 around the nation, and how it's actually happening. It's not a theoretical thing.
Yeah.
It's not hypothetical, unfortunately. It's actually happening. What's our next step? That's what I want to know. What's our next step to try to help actual people understand?
And we
that
say
they
"are."
can help.
This is not Kate the agency. This is something much like most of these things. It's got to be solved within the school district and the school buildings. This is a school district issue within that order, and there's so many. The tools we can put in place can minimize that. But it comes down at the end of the day that this is just the way schools operate. There's a security consciousness that they have. And there are consequences for those that are lackadaisical about it. I would say those are lackadaisical about it. There probably needs to be some disciplinary consequences that not only do you put yourself at risk, you put a lot of other folks at risk. And when you start having the consequences, even though you don't want to start out with that, that's a temptation reducer as well. And I've given examples at another level, other thing I worked at. We tried every way to educate folks, and it took actually removing X number for folks to say, oh, okay, I guess there are some pretty serious consequences of me keeping employment by being lackadaisical about security.
And we see that in real life too. If anyone's seen the Click It or Ticket campaigns with the Kentucky State Police, and it's encouraging people to be safer by plugging in their seatbelt, by clicking their seatbelt.
Yeah.
And so what can we do? There's a carrot that you get to stay alive if you have a car wreck, but then there's also the stick. If you don't have that attached, then you're going to get a ticket. And so we've never done the stick before here at KDE, and I don't think districts have either.
Well, I think I think that's one of the tools in the toolbox. To be honest with you, I think has to be there to get it on the radar. We can do these other things, and they're good and they're educational, but there have to be consequences to folks to really start circling it up, and you'll get X percent, as we saw. I mean, I saw it firsthand. Removing employment of 5 or 10% of the most extreme folks we have, the jump and the sustained jump we had in compliance. I don't think, I hate to say that it was better than anything else that we did. And they were much more paying attention. Just like, don't wait for an incident to happen in your district for you to go, let me pay attention to that. And it shouldn't take this happening 173 times. We don't want that. And that's why I say we're sharing this. It can happen to you. Because it's happened to one, and now it can happen to others, there's for sure.
And I'll bring it back to the superintendent's assurance and have that really intentional piece with our EdTech leaders and our superintendents to say, okay, now what's our action? What's our steps here to help address this assurance or help make this assurance successful in the future?
Bob, you had a question on here. Let's see the response to question 8. This is about blocking the unknown category. Particularly this was Lightspeed. I'm sure the other, I think the other districts use iBoss. There's a few that use that one. They probably have something equivalent. So talk about why that's a pretty good one, because this is an awareness thing too. You may not realize you have this tool available to you in Lightspeed that it can reduce one of the vulnerabilities you're talking
Indeed, yeah, and we think about it as really impacting, keeping people safe by not allowing them to get to certain content on the internet, the pornography and other types of content, but it can also help us with phishing. And because these are category-based tools, the web filters and the internet content management devices, because they work on categories, we can block categories of websites that, and I hate to use this, have not been categorized as either educational or any other category. And so, because our web content filtering devices are educational in purpose, most of the educational websites have been categorized. Most of the stuff you want to go to has been categorized. Phishers will send you URLs to new websites that typically have not gone through and been categorized as phishing yet. And that's one of the ways that they get victims. If you click on a URL, it's generally going to be a new one, and you're going to get there and you're going to have an opportunity to put in your username and password, which a lot of people do. We've seen about 20% of people actually go ahead and give away their username and password. And so by blocking that unknown category of URLs, you prevent someone from reaching a lot of the URLs that are being sent by phishers. Now, some phishers are smart. They use Google Drive and Google Documents and other places. This isn't going to catch 100% of the phishing emails and URLs, but it's going to prevent access to a lot of those. So it's one more tool in a toolbox, in addition to everything else you're doing, like educating your staff, that sort of thing. We kind of recommend that you do it. And I'm really gratified to see that we have 88% of the folks on here are saying yes, it's being blocked. That's a huge number for me to see. And for a lot of other folks, if you're not aware of it, I just wanted to make you aware of it, and you can
We
contact
probably should
us.
add another category, we're not aware of it, probably in this one, because those ones may be aware of it. I'd like to see how many, this was the first time they were aware of it. So that's, maybe that's one we asked the next time. So Bob, thanks for
Sure.
our monthly security update. Appreciate all that you do, and I know you're involved with all these things. As I say, I don't, Friday is usually a fun day that people look forward to. I do not like to get Bob's calls at 3 to 5 p.m. on a Friday, because I know that's not a good thing, and it's not been a good thing for a while on the Fridays. For some reason, I don't know what it is.
I can ruin a weekend, there's no doubt. And I do want to say that I'm gratified to hear a lot of the security conversations happening without me being involved in them, because that means
It's another
that,
step towards
yeah, it's another
it.
step towards maturity. So thank you all very much.
Want to you all be aware of the Kentucky Digital Summit. That's different than the KISTI Summit that we have. That's going to be on April 17th. Usually less than a handful of districts attend that. Just wanted you aware of it. We'll send you the invite for it. It's typically for just state government folks, but wanted you aware we're going to be presenting the people side of technology to the rest of state government. That was one of the topics that folks were interested in, so that's the Department of Education. We'll be doing that. As I told you, we're going to be using that as a way to educate a lot of other folks that are out there. Want to give you an update on a couple other items. First of all, I'll start on the data side of things. School report card. We're in the final stages of getting that contract signed. We do have a spring users group meetings with our Infinite Campus system in March 20 to 23rd in the Western Kentucky districts. For Eastern Kentucky districts, 27th through the 30th. We also have the Mastering Campus, Infinite Campus, is in June 25th to 29th, and don't know the location. The cost is $750. And you register on Infinite Campus University through the campus community that is out there. And also, I think we have 8 districts that are using instructional management system. And for those 8, just let us know if your intention is to use it beyond June, and we'll get you pricing for that. That's when the Department of Education stops paying for it. And we are doing an e-transcript batch upload for the Parchment webinar on March the 7th at 11 a.m. and March the 15th. And that's been a very successful thing for us. I want to give you some more technical stats. Our firewall status, which I'm really pleased about where we're at, been incredibly successful. We now have 171 districts that have been successfully transitioned to our firewall in the cloud. We have 2 remaining ones. One will be done here in February, and one maybe during the spring break time frame. KSD and KSB has been done along with KDE, the agency. We do have a couple of pure technical sessions at KISTI. The Post Office 365 upgrade, KETS Security. Bob, I'm sure you're involved with that one. And KETS Technology 101 for those new to K-12, Kentucky K-12 education technology. We have some other offices, some other parts of our organization doing those, but I know the field staff is involved with those. So pretty cool internet stats that we have. Our internet usage peaked in December of 2017 at 50 gig. At the same time frame in December 16, it was 37. We moved over 80 terabytes of data to and from the internet. 80. And in 2016, that was 57. It just shows you the growth going on with your infographic. We had 35 DDoS attacks in 2017. 2020, that's up from 29 in 2016. All of those, with the tools that we have in place, really mitigate that well. But it shows you the increase of all the kind of attacks that are occurring in there. As far as our reliability of our network, it's up 99.97% of the time, and the average outage is only 8.9 minutes. That's pretty spectacular for reliability of a network. If you take a look at ours compared to any other network in the United States that's out there. The Munis software upgrade to 11.3, pilots will start in March. And May is also involved with the replacement of the Munis VPN device in every district. We did have a question, Mike, around E-rate. Actually, two questions we wanted districts to respond to. If you can bring those up. Mike, what is the time frames for E-rate that we need to make districts aware of?
Well, the applications need to be in by March 22nd, so the filing window is closing
Okay.
March 22nd.
Okay. And so we had a question around,
Yeah, we were, I'll have to remind myself of the specifics of the questions we
nobody's
had.
answered them. All right.
So we just turned them on.
Oh.
And so.
I thought they were all open, so, okay, so they weren't all open. All right. All right, so open that up. We have two questions regarding E-rate that we'd like you to respond to. Is your district going to be filing for them, and is your district, you feel like you're prepared for them?
Yeah, we're, two reasons are, one, obviously, we're wanting to get a feel of the continuing maximization of the E-rate program, and so that's why we asked that question. And then the other is, we just recently completed trainings that we did regionally, and I think we had about 120 attendees total in those, which is a pretty good number. But we certainly want to be aware if there's concerns within districts of being, knowledgeable, capable of maximizing the E-rate services. So that's why we put those questions in there, was to just get a feel for how things are going.
It's kind of fun to watch those, as now it's open,
There we go.
of where they're going for it. Yeah, there we go. And that's my bad for not saying just open that thing wide open, because
This
this
is
one
more
that could.
exciting.
It's more exciting this way. Yeah, good to see it. I
Didn't
can see
want
it.
to get lost.
Yeah, get lost in. Okay, yeah. Especially as they were doing that other stuff. How many more people have gone to the other one? With the
By the way,
history
there was a
response?
social question on if you're wrong, how many push-ups are on the line?
Yeah, there's always push-ups on the line of some kind,
There
some
also-
kind of consequence.
There also was a question about the E-rate contract matrix, which we should have out.
Yep.
I responded to it actually
you
within
answered
about a week.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think also a question we had that I'd like to see, I think it's question number 7. This goes along with Phil's side of it, about the internet usage that peaked. I hope that one was open. Was it open or not?
Yeah, it's
Okay, so let's see how that one was, given what I just kind of talked about with some stats.
Well, it just got opened, right? I mean, it just got
Yeah.
opened as well, I think. Yeah, so,
Okay.
so it may still be popular.
All right, so yeah, like I say, all during this, if you can get in there, those are really helpful. This is helpful for us, once again, as we're doing internal discussions with budgeting folks here in Katy, the agency, along with legislators. All this stuff is fantastic. We do the summary notes of this, of all of our webcasts. No other state kind of does that, or does this in particular, this monthly kind of thing, or our regional things that we do, or the CIO Summit. But these kind of responses are used for a variety of things. So I really appreciate your feedback, and it tells us it's going up. It's not going to go downward, which we didn't fully expect. And I'm suspecting everybody's expecting the same high levels of reliability out there. The other things I had remaining, we had a couple of discussion questions or anything else that's bubbled up with the 2 discussion questions that we had that's worth just, quickly
We've got some
addressing,
really great feedback.
along
in the
with,
discussions.
which things are most significantly impacted. I know something bubbled up with that one, and what do you see the leading factors for the internet growth out there? But as you all are looking at that one, just wanted you aware of, there's going to be a growth with Google, and this is something that's just been, we're just aware of.
Grow with Google.
Grow with Google event on 29th of March in Louisville. And we've made the appropriate folks aware of what's happening in K-12, but that's the intention of that is way beyond K-12, and Google's doing that across America, and Louisville's one of their stops that we have out there. I mentioned the Digital Summit in April. It falls on the 17th. That's normally the same day that we do our webcast, our monthly webcast. So we're going to move our monthly webcast to April the 16th for April. This is not March I'm talking about, but April. Wanted you were out there. And I think, Marty, the next webcast is a good time to talk about the computer science standards, where we're at, and the timing of those that we see of that going forward. But I wanted to give a chance before we sign off here of anything you saw bubbling up from these discussion questions or anything else would be appropriate to address. We typically address all of them, but do you see anything?
From the discussions, I think some things to point out: leading factors for internet growth, mobility, cloud. More
Yeah.
cloud services.
Yeah.
We've seen in Kentucky that trend, and as we've stated, we're more so than our state
Yeah.
subscribed to cloud services, and so digital content also contributing to cloud, and more one-to-one devices. So all those things fitting in, and then more use and more adoption. Someone submitted that as the learning of how to integrate more digital content, tools, and technologies into instruction, then we're going to see more internet use, obviously. And then the other discussion point, significant impacts, the overwhelming, of course, there's devices and one-to-one implementations, but the overwhelming is staffing. The overwhelming concern is staffing.
Yeah. So it's
If I had to bubble it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything outside those that's
Really great, and thanks everyone. Great participation, feedback through the social questions. We've had several members of our teams responding back and answering hot questions. There is a good, I think, worth noting before we sign off that there's a question about the policies that we addressed from the superintendent's assurance. And we've worked with KSBA over the years to shore up some policies or statements. I think the two things are the standard AUP that's in the KSBA pack, but it's also the procedure part, which is the signature sheet. And there's also major touch points on the personal use in that signature piece. And so our field staff, we can continue to share that out and kind of work that, kind of close that loop.
Well, appreciate you all joining us today. The next time I probably see you face to face, we'll be at the KISTI event. Encourage you to go to, if you're new. That is a fantastic event. I know in budget cuts it's tough to justify that. That is one that's worth investing in from a lot of different perspectives. So we hope to see you there. Definitely at the summit for the rest of the KISTI event. Take care.